You probably heard the claim before that Christians are just as likely to divorce as non-Christians. I've always been skeptical about this claim, as it just didn't seem to match what I observed being a member of many different churches in different places for decades. However, I didn't know what the source of the data was or the criteria they were using to make that claim, so I decided to jump in and do a deep dive. I found out through my study that this claim is inaccurate based on a bad study, and better studies, even from non-religious groups like Harvard, contradict its claims. In today's video, I'm going to explain the origin of this myth and what the problem was with their study. Then in my next video, I'll show you the studies that, when they correct that error, show a different picture of the divorce rate among Christians altogether. Now, the claim originates with the Barna Group, who are a Christian research organization. In September 2004, they published a report entitled "Born-Again Christians Just as Likely to Divorce as Are Non-Christians." Their report was based off phone interviews that they conducted with 3,614 adults who were in the United States. Now, you'll notice that they said born-again Christians instead of just Christians. That's because they asked respondents, number one, if they made a personal commitment to Jesus Christ that is still important in their life today, and number two, that they indicated that they believe that when they die, they will go to heaven because they have confessed their sins and accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. Now, of their about 3,600 people that they interviewed, 40% of the respondents were able to identify as born again according to that definition. So when they compared the 40% of the respondents who identified as born again along with their 60% of non-born again adults, they found out that, quote, among married born again Christians, 35% have experienced a divorce. That figure is identical to the outcome among married adults who are not born again, 35%. Barna then redid the study almost 4 years later and published the research in March 2008. In that study, they phone interviewed 3,792 adults who have been married. They concluded, born-again Christians who are not evangelical were indistinguishable from the national average on the matter of divorce. 33% have been married and divorced. When evangelicals and non-evangelical born-again Christians are combined into an aggregate class of born-again adults, their divorce figure is statistically identical to that of the non-born-again adults, 32% versus 33% respectively. So they said when you take evangelicals, which is a new class which we'll talk about in a second, and you combine them with the born-again adults, which are those who could affirm those two statements, and you combine them, you get 32% of them who have been divorced. So you compare that to the non-born-again class of 33%, you got a 1% difference, which is statistically irrelevant. Now, this second study introduced a new category of person different from the born-again called evangelical. Now, in their study, evangelicals by themselves had a 26% divorce rate, which is 21% lower than the born-again divorce rate of 33%. So that's statistically significant. Now, to identify an evangelical, they had to affirm 7 other statements that were more than the born-again cohort. They had to say that their faith is very important to their life today. They believe that they have a personal responsibility to share their religious beliefs about Christ with non-Christians. They believe that Satan exists. They believe that eternal salvation is possible only through grace, not works. They believe that Jesus Christ lived a sinless life on the earth, and they asserted that the Bible is accurate in all that it teaches. Finally, they describe God as all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect deity who created the universe and still rules it today. So those who could affirm those 7 things are labeled an evangelical. So remember that Barna concludes that the born-again Christians have the same divorce rate as those who are not born again. And when you combine evangelical and born again together, it has the same as well as those who are not born again. And the reason they can combine both born again and evangelical together and not make much of a difference is because they're only using about 300 evangelicals in their survey, which is a small sample size compared to the born again cohort. But here's the problem with their study. They base their study on a self-profession of faith with no checks on practice. Even on their more strict evangelical definition, Barna says, Being classified as an evangelical is not dependent upon church attendance or the denominational affiliation of the church attended. So according to Barna, you don't need to be a member of a church nor attend one to be counted as an evangelical. That's significant. That means Barna's statistics don't differentiate between nominal Christians, who are those who identify as Christians but don't actively practice their faith, with devout Christians, who are those who attend church and live out their faith. The end result is that they end up combining the statistics of nominal or cultural Christians.
Most of you guys are Christians, right?
We're all Christian.
Along with those who are genuine and live out their faith, and treating them as if they're one group.
So, too Christian and not Christian enough.
Now, it's no surprise that nominal Christians are hard to differentiate between the culture, both in practice and beliefs.
I'm not a good Christian.
So this is a bad study for determining the divorce rates among genuine Christians. A good study will not shallowly define Christian based on a person's self-profession alone, but will ensure that they're living it out. When Barna gets closer to a devout Christian by asking more questions, they find out that evangelicals have a statistically significant lower divorce rate, 21% lower than those who fit their born-again Christian definition. But there are still two problems. The first is that this Barna study interviewed only 339 evangelicals, which was 9% of the interviews they conducted. So it's a fairly small sample size. But more importantly, they still did not account for regular church attendance, which is the best statistical criteria for taking one's faith seriously. Personal affirmation does not cost anything, but going to church regularly costs people's time, especially when it's regular and consistent, and is therefore a better indication that one takes their faith seriously. Thankfully, other research organizations realize this, and when they do their studies, they not only use a larger sample size, but they also filter their answers for church attendance. When this is done, it paints an entirely different picture on the divorce rate among Christians. And I'm going to go over those studies in my next video. Now, while we're speaking about marriage, if you're looking to prepare for or strengthen your already existing marriage, the consensus best book from the Christian worldview is The Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller and his wife Kathy. In it, they share a vision for what marriage looks like according to the Bible. I've got a link to both the paperback as well as the Kindle version in the video description so you can start reading it today. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.